Mic testing. So, good morning. Let's start this time in prayer. We praise and thank you, O God. You are wonderful, God, to us, and you help us. Continue your provision and protection for us. Give us wisdom in understanding the four minima of MTBMLE, and continue to provide for us and take care of us and our loved ones. Always we pray in Christ's name. Amen. So, would you give type an emoticon that reflects how you feel right now? The form. Okay, there you go. Somehow feel wacky. There you go. It's great to be in a good mood always. So The four minima as basic requirements in the implementation of mother tongue based multilingual education. These are four minimum requirements in order to implement MTBMLE. Let me give a background. Mother tongue based multilingual education refers to the effective use of more than two languages in the teaching and learning process, starting from the language that the learner is more familiar with before introducing other languages. Note class that the learner it should be with the language that the learner is more familiar with. Maybe it's Taglish, not Tagalog as Francisco Balagtas understood it. The key word is familiar. Okay, what is keyword? Okay, in institutionalizing MTBMLE, the Department of Education states that the preponderance of local and international research consistent with the basic education sector reform agenda recommendations affirms the benefits and relevance of MLE or multilingual education. Notable empirical studies like the Lingua Franca project and Lubuagan first language component show that number one, first, learners learn to read more quickly when in their first language. Second, pupils have learned to read and write in their first language, learn to speak, read, and write in a second language and third language more quickly than those who are taught in a second or third language first. And third, in terms of cognitive development and its effects in other academic areas, pupils taught to read and write in their first language acquire such competences more quickly. Competencies more quickly. Class, I think this relates to what we call underlying proficiency, which I discussed with you uh, during our one of our face-to-face meetings. And here are principles in implementing MTBMLE. So we use the mother tongue as a learning area for kindergarten to grade 3 and shall focus on developing language and literacy skills. You know, many advocates believe that it should be up at least up to grade 6, not just to grade 3. Another component of implementation: instruction, teaching materials, and assessment shall be in the regional or native language of the learners, something that's familiar to them. And the DepEd shall formulate a mother language transition program from mother tongue to Filipino English from grade 4 to grade 6. That's why we say, class, that our MTBMLE implementation here in the Philippines is called transitional. That's the type of bilingual education we have here until uh, Congressman Roman put a stop to all of it. So Filipino and English shall be gradually introduced as languages of instruction. Okay, so these are implementations. So, following the MTBMLE program, the use of the learner's mother tongue as medium of teaching and learning is among the most distinct features of the K to 12 of the kindergarten curriculum and Key Stage 1 towards grades 1 to 3. And here are key features of the MTBMLE program. It acknowledges and cultivates what the learners already know and builds on the learner's prior knowledge to move to new language, to new knowledge, from what is familiar to the unfamiliar. It builds a strong foundation for literacy in the learner's first language, which becomes a good bridge to learning other languages. So there is transfer of skills. Again, there is transfer of skills. Then, it uses locally relevant or culturally familiar concepts to help learners understand concepts prescribed in the curriculum. Again, this is something to do with the familiar. Plus, when you use local materials and culturally familiar concepts, it affirms the culture of the learner. It doesn't reject the culture of the learner. And the implementation emphasizes understanding, meaning, and communication, as well as skill development. So we now go to the form minima as basic requirements in the implementation of MTBMLE. The form minima. These are the basic requirements. These are the minimum requirements. These are the most essential requirements. Okay. Number one is working orthography. The working orthography should be acceptable to the stakeholders or the community who speaks the language and the linguist who can vouch for its soundness. So it should be acceptable to the stakeholders, plus there should be input from linguists who can vouch for its soundness. And the working orthography can be used to adequately represent the language in its written form. So that's why our baybayin may not be very representative of the language. For example, how do you represent the v and the f in baybayin? Okay, and the working orthography should be easy to learn. It's teachable, and it should be easy to transfer to other languages and easy to reproduce. So class, this is my beef with the Commission sa Wikang Filipino. The orthography that they're imposing on indigenous peoples are not easy to reproduce when it comes to laptops because the many of the symbols that they use have diacritics, and those diacritics are difficult to type in a laptop. Now, in the working orthography, when we say orthography class, we mean spelling primarily. In a working orthography, there should be a spelling guide. Maybe I could share a spelling guide uh, in class when we do face to face. So for the spelling guide, it helps in documenting the orthography of the language, including illustrated alphabet chart and tables with examples of words to illustrate the use of the letters. So there are example words. The spelling guide is a record of what community members and educators have agreed on. It's something they agreed on. That's why class, I told you several weeks ago, I went to the Dulangan Manobo Language Congress in Sultan Kudarat. The Language Congress is a gathering of all sectors in order to come up with an agreement regarding the language issues. The spelling guide class provides school teachers with a reference guide for teaching in the mother tongue and for production of MTB, MLE, Indigenous Peoples Education materials. So the spelling guide serves several purposes. Okay, the spelling guide includes alphabet primers. Primers are learning materials that are used to help learners be able to be familiar with the alphabet, particularly in writing them. Okay, here are some examples, just the front page, the cover. This is in Kinamayu. So here's the alphabet chart. Okay, here's a directed word list. A particular letter representing a sound is a given example at the start, or the term is initial, in the middle, or medial, and then in the end, it's the final. Now, for reference sake, the Filipino and English translations are also given. Okay, so Sounds of Our Language book, a premiere for teaching children reading and writing skills, is also beneficial, especially in indigenous peoples' context where they're not literature rich. So, as I said, a primer is a way to teach orthography in a systematic way. What sounds are represented by each letter of their alphabet so that as they learn to read, they will be able to decode the words and understand the message. So, the primer enables a learner, to learn the orthography, the spelling system. By the way, class, there is such a thing called the pre-primer. We have a primer and we have a pre-primer. A pre-primer is a book intended to introduce learners to using a book. It's a workbook that's used to teach and introduce learners to books, how to hold the book, how to read the book, how to write in the book. That's a pre-primer. Now, when learners are already familiar with using books and workbooks, that's the time that you introduce the primer. And importantly, the primer development is based on the orthography agreed upon and approved by the community. So look at the terms here. Buinen, Kinamayu, and Gaddang. Notice the Buinen and Kinamayu, they have difficult diacritics. Okay, these are the ones approved by the KWF, which I disagree with. Okay, the primer for teaching reading and writing in the early grades must comprise of the indigenous sounds or the sounds of their language or mother tongue. So the primer is all about the sounds of the first language, the familiar language. So you teach children to write in their own language because this strategy will make learning reading and writing easier because the sounds that make up syllables, words or phrases and sentences are already familiar to the children. You start with something familiar for teaching the unfamiliar. So learning is from known to the unknown, also known as the schema theory of learning, meaning the sounds of the language are known to the children and the symbols are unknown. If the sounds are unknown and the letters are unknown, that's difficult. But when you have the known and the unknown, that can help them easily recognize the sounds and relate them to the symbols and the letters. Okay, so for example, what is familiar or known in indigenous sounds are the the and the e. So the symbols are the o, and the e. So in the case of the indigenous children, only reading and writing are the children's learning task because it's in their mother tongue. They don't have to learn the language. Sounds and symbols that are not indigenous to the language are taught in the higher grades when they already master reading and writing in the mother tongue. Therefore, an orthography that represents the sounds of the children's mother tongue is important in the implementation of MTBMLE. Okay, here's an example of a teaching guide regarding the letters and symbols of Kinamayu. Okay, so each letter has a lesson. Here's an example of a primer lesson in Kinamayu. Maybe I'll bring examples of primers and pre-primers in in our face-to-face class. The number two requirement is the dictionary. It may not be as technical as a Webster's dictionary. It may not even require pronunciation. You see, class, when Samuel Johnson began his dictionary, it included a pronunciation because, according to him, there should be a proper pronunciation. Many British people were not pronouncing words the way he wanted them to pronounce them. That's why he had a pronunciation guide. But for our purposes, a dictionary is a word list or collection of expressions, phrases in the language with the corresponding meanings in another language. Maybe that's Filipino, maybe that's English, maybe that's Ilocano, Visayan, or other regional language. So a student dictionary for the early grades is a word list organized alphabetically. It gives the equivalent word in different languages. It is a reference guide for the teachers, many of whom are learning how to write consistently in their own language. So even the teachers themselves are learning to write consistently. And it's made available to pupils so that it will be a help for them as they transition from the mother tongue to Filipino and English. So, for example, here's Gaddang, Pupils Dictionary for Early Grades. I'm not sure if it is alphabetical, but maybe it's alphabetical in their own language. Oh no, it's not alphabetical. I don't know why. It should be alphabetical, but I don't know why it's not alphabetical here. So we need a working orthography, we need a dictionary, we also need a grammar book. A grammar book is a description of the grammar of the language. It includes a definition, an explanation or description of basic sentence structures. It includes non-verbal basic clauses like uh, pogi ako. Non-verbal eh. Walang halong verb. There's no verb. Then there's a verbal clause. Okay? Nagpapapogi ako. Ayan. And then there's an existential clause. May pogi dito, for example. May pogi dito. That's existential. Okay, it also discusses verbal inflection. That's very important in Filipino. Kumakain, kumain, ikinain, ipinangkain. Verbal inflection is very important in Philippine languages. Also markers like si, kai, ang, nang, those are markers. Okay, very important. And here's an example of a grammar book in Kinemayu. Okay. Oh, it's in another language because it will try to help other speakers to help in writing the grammar. And then finally, we need to have literature and reading materials. Because if you teach them to read but they have nothing to read, then there's that's an impediment to developing their literacy skills. Development, production, and distribution of inexpensive instructional materials in the designated language at the school, division, and regional levels with a special priority on beginning reading and children's literature. These materials should be as much as possible original, reflecting local people, events, realities, and appropriate to the language, age, and culture of the learners. So it should be culturally appropriate. It should also be age appropriate. Maybe we should also mention here what we learned from the Vietnam group that the literacy material should be attractive. As I told you before, class, when indigenous peoples try to compare the books in their own language and the books in another language, they see that the books in another language are more attractive than their own books. They develop some sort of inferiority complex. Nagkakaroon ng inferiority complex pag nakikita ng mga taga-tribo na mas maganda yung book sa Filipino at saka sa English. Feeling nila, ito lang, hanggang dito lang yung language natin. So, I should emphasize here that the literature and reading material should be nice also. Okay. Examples are big books, small books. Big books and small books, the only difference between them is the size in terms of structure. But big books are used in classes in reading in class in front of classes. So for this is for class reading. Small books are for individual reading. So I'll share these in the face to face. There are other materials like storybooks, and those storybooks should talk about culturally familiar ideas. Wait lang wait lang. May tubig lang, wait lang tubig. Thank you for your patience, class. That was the water supply.
Patience class. Patience class.
Mic testing. Yeah. So other materials could include listening stories, stories that are for listening. This is just more of for fluency. Okay, picture stories, wordless picture books, big picture, the busy picture where there are other there are many people doing so many things. It's just for familiarization. Okay, here are some objectives of the development of literature. To develop interest in reading, teachers can read stories to and with them in the language they know best. So big books can help develop interest in reading. Small books can also help in developing reading for individuals. And then number two, to model reading naturally with understanding and enjoyment. So both the big book and a small book can do this. And number three, to provide them with easy to read stories in their language with familiar context so that they can practice reading. Okay, again, class, the context here is that the community is not literature rich. They don't have a lot of reading materials. And then finally, to encourage pupils to write their own stories and read their stories. Maybe writing could include just drawing, and reading could just include reading or reading the pictures at the very start. Okay, here are some examples. These are on the left, you have big books and small books. I'll bring some for our class. And here's the theme picture, the busy picture. Notice different people are doing different things. Okay, class, I teach mother tongue based multilingual education to the BEMC students. And these are what we try to produce. Now these are also listening stories. They just listen. The use of the student's first language means that literacy and content can be taught meaningfully from day one, and that this knowledge can then be transferred across into the second language. So, literacy in the first language can be transferred to the second language according to Cummins' interdependence theory. We studied that, the underlying proficiency, the iceberg principle. So the first language, linguistic knowledge and skills that a child possesses can be extremely instrumental to the development of corresponding abilities in the second language. Instead of teaching them English and teaching them English reading at the same time, that's a very bad idea. So you start with the familiar to teach the unfamiliar. Okay, so thank you very much, class. I wonder if at this point you have any questions. Oh, the attendance. Let me add something to the attendance. Short take away. And this should be paragraph form. In paragraph form, then this should be required. Let me copy the link. And here it is. Goodbye, class. Please answer the student form, the Google form. Bye bye.
The Google form. But at the Google form.